Spiritual Pathways to World Peace. An interview with Patricia Hunt Perry, political scientist and teacher at Ramapo College in New Jersey. She has done work on PBS with a television series called Prospects for Humanity, and has also done a radio series in New York on social, political, and spiritual issues. Her main interests are on issues of world peace and the spiritual foundations leading to peace. Interviewer for the program is William Metzger, a Unitarian minister and managing editor of the American Theosophist magazine.
Well, as a political scientist interested in spiritual issues, do you find that to be unusual in your experiences with other political scientists?
Well, these days I do, William, but I mean, political science has turned to quantification and that kind of analysis a good deal, but let's not forget the ancient roots of political science are really in the spiritual, what we might call religious. I mean, Socrates was a mystic. Augustine and Aquinas were religious men. Henry David Thoreau in our country was a transcendentalist influenced by the East. So the roots of political science are in the kind of spiritual traditions, but today a lot of it has gone in another direction, but we're going to help move it back again.
And you blend these in your teaching?
Yes, I do. In my own teaching, I approach things from a kind of larger point of view, we might say. I certainly am very interested in the tradition, the real traditional political science. But, and there's a lot that has been done with the modern analysis that's been helpful. It's just not my major interest. It's a tool. As far as I'm concerned, it's a small tool.
Right. And when you speak about the issue of peace, you speak a great deal about peace from the standpoint of inner peace. And I'm wondering if you would say something about that.
Right. I do, because I think that for many, many centuries, people have been trying to manipulate political institutions and thereby creating a good world. Now, these people have been very well intentioned. But for myself, I think that perhaps the manipulation of political institutions alone is not enough, that we need to transform the individuals who are in those institutions. That's why I'm very fond of saying that there's never really been a real revolution. The revolutions that have occurred politically over the centuries have merely changed the location of power. They've done nothing about transforming individuals, putting them into a new situation, but also bringing about a transformation of the individual so that something new is really created in the world.
And how does one transform the individual? What are the techniques,
right.
the methodologies?
Oh, well, I don't know, William. It's easier to study political techniques because they're all outlined very carefully for you in books. I think that there is no overall blueprint, but I do think that it's very good to start looking at our language, to approach the spiritual traditions in a way that might have us understand that there may be something there for us to learn from various kinds of spiritual traditions, and to really look again, perhaps search for new paradigms, new ways of being in the world, so that just the political is not separated from right action, right living in community, the right way we deal with other human beings.
What kinds of experiences have you had in political action in the world on behalf of peace? What have you observed as you've worked with political activist types?
Well, I was very active in the 60s and in the early 70s, both in the anti-war movement and in the civil rights movement. And I, like many people, I think, found that that political answers did not give us all of the answers that we really needed, that something else needed to be done as well. And so in my own work now, I would say that I am still very politically involved, but that it comes from a different place. I'm very keen in my own political work to see that we do not make a them and an us, that we don't let political, ideological kinds of divisions keep us apart as human beings. We're all part of a common humanity. We're all part of a common species. And I think we need to begin to focus on that. One of my colleagues talks about war as a species disorder. I think that's helpful. I think that's very helpful.
That's an intriguing concept. Carry the individual psychiatric evaluation to a larger social
Right.
group.
Right.
You've spoken also of peace as wholeness, and that seems to me to relate to that
Yes.
concept.
That's right. Actually, in the language even, you can look at some other languages and find that the word peace is used as a time of coming together, a wholeness, a completeness. Whereas in the Western tradition, it has more meant the ending of strife or the absence of war. I think we need to look at peace in other ways. You know, it's very unfortunate, William, the way the term is used in our society today. Even political entities do things like change the conception. The Pentagon, for example, changed the term lasting peace to permanent pre-hostility. That's a quote. And the military changed the term civilian deaths to, quote, collateral damage. Now that doesn't assist us in looking at what's really happening. So I think we need to observe, to see what's really happening, and then to find a foundation for our social work.
Sounds like a good example of the way in which language can separate us from our humanity.
Yes, that's exactly
really
right.
Disconnect us from each other as persons.
Exactly.
And I think you'd also used the term fragile agreement within constant struggle. What is the relationship between peace, as you think about it, and constant struggle?
Well, I think that peace does not necessarily arise from constant struggle. I think that peace can arise from a kind of inner working on oneself that then reaches outward into the world. And some people have a theory of course, of struggle. I don't think that change is necessarily struggle.
And that life is a constant struggle. Life is always a challenge.
Well, there may always be change, but I guess that in my own framework, I would hope to rise above the idea of struggle and go to other kinds of conceptions of it.
In working with people in peace movements, have you observed a connection between their effectiveness in that work to their inner resources or inner being?
Well, I think it's true definitely for some people. I'll tell you, I've probably seen various kinds of demonstrations, from lying down on the street to protest the Cambodian bombing, people wrapping themselves in bandages to protest the bombing in Cambodia and saying, look what you're really doing, to the June 12th march in New York City, and I believe it was '82. Now that particular march I feel was very interesting, that June 12th march. There was such a different feeling in that march from other activities, and I'm not putting down the other activities at all. I think maybe it was a matter of evolution, but the different kinds of people, from old men and women in the Midwest to young hippies in New York City, to people in the environmental movement from the Northwest. Everyone came together in that march. There were people from the arts, from theater, And you know, it didn't get underway for a long time. My son and I and a friend were sitting on the street curb waiting for it to get underway. I think it was supposed to start at 9 or something in the morning. It started about 1:30. Nobody minded. Everybody sat around. The feeling of unity in that group, the kind of sense of togetherness, the nonviolence. I felt the nonviolence in that march in a way that I have seldom found it in other places. Sometimes peace activists are all ready to go out and kill for peace. That's kind of the approach. But in that march, I really found something else. I really found a living feeling of peace and a living demonstration of it, rather than just a verbal discussion of it, a verbal analysis.
And it sounds like the group really represented a kind of a crossing of a lot of lines.
They did.
People who perhaps ordinarily would not come together.
That's right. They did, and it was, I think there were 750,000 people. The streets were crowded. The park, Central Park, was crowded. It was, and yet there was just such a feeling of happiness, cooperation. I still have a wonderful image in my mind, you know, with all of these wonderful people who participated in it. I still remember a little old man and a little old woman sitting in their fold-up their little fold-up chairs, and they had a sign in front of them, and it said, "One planet, save it." Now,
yes.
They didn't seem like the people who would have been marching in the late 60s in the anti-war movement, but they were touched, and they knew as well as we all knew, as well as the peace activists who were walking in the 60s in the anti-war movement. We all knew by that time, by 82, that we were in this together, and that it transcended boundaries of all types.
There's something very powerful about that kind of a discovery,
Yes.
of that experience,
That's
in that
true.
experience.
That's true.
And it gives one hope, doesn't it?
It does. I'm very hopeful. I claim not to be at all naive. I mean, some of my political scientist friends will say, well, if you're hopeful, you're naive. I simply won't accept that. I think that it's very important to remember that we can have a good deal of hope.
That's a common kind of a reaction.
That's right.
That I think we often get when we speak to military types. Maybe we could
Right.
say conservative political types, perhaps. That we speak in hopeful ways or talk about peace and so forth, and it's everything of that type is interpreted as naivete.
Well, I don't think it's just conservative. I think that people, sometimes think from every direction, from every kind of, the whole political spectrum, that if one speaks hopefully, that means one is naive and therefore to be dismissed. I simply wouldn't accept that at all. I think that there is reason to be hopeful that that all of us together, whatever place we come from in the political spectrum, from very conservative to very, very liberal or radical, need to have the perception that we really need to work on this together, that it is all of our business. None of us, regardless of what our politics, none of us can afford at this time to let ourselves be separated from any of our fellow men or women.
Hope becomes a very practical kind of an action then, doesn't it? It's
Yes.
Almost a matter of choosing to be hopeful.
Well, yes. It is certainly not enough alone. It requires a kind of dedication, I think, of one's life, and a kind of approach that comes through listening as well as through action, through having some kind of framework, foundation from which our action takes place. But, I'm struck as you ask your question by a comment by an ex-ambassador. I don't want to, of course, I never would give away anyone's name, but this ex-ambassador had listened to a talk I'd given, and he remarked to someone, well, that's all very interesting, but I think maybe that sounds a little naive. And we had occasion to talk after that. And I said to him, we talked about some of our things, and finally he turned to me and he said, you know, I've worked all these years to bring peace in the world, and I can't even have peace in my own family. And I am not a peaceful person myself in my heart, and I really don't know how I can bring peace to the world if I am in my own self and in my own family not even peaceful. Now you see, he came to that realization.
Mm-hmm.
At first, he sort of dismissed some of these ideas. And of course, I will say, he came to that realization while he and I were talking by ourselves alone. And obviously, I'm not going to give away his name. I wouldn't, do that. I'm not sure he'd say that publicly, but I know he knows it in his heart. There's always, I think, that place to which we can reach out in people. And if they don't seem to respond at the moment, then we let that go. But just because someone doesn't respond at the moment doesn't mean that they won't respond at some time, I think.
What is the relationship, do you think, between the working on the inner peace building
Mm-hmm.
and being active in the world?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a movement do you see is taking place between these two? Does one work on
Mm-hmm.
the self first
Mm-hmm.
and then move out into the world? How do they interact?
Well, that's a question that I've been struggling with myself, so I enjoy talking about it with you. For myself, I find that it was necessary perhaps to pull back a little bit from political action for a period of time and then to become very involved again, but still being very involved with the world while I am also working on myself, as the term might be. So that I see those two as going together for myself. Now, there are other people who have withdrawn to a monastery, to an ashram, to a mountain, wherever, and who feel that they can't take political action until they have done a certain kind of work on themselves in that kind of secluded way. I really respect that too. So I think there isn't a blueprint, that there are various ways of approaching this. As Gandhi said, for Gandhi, his religious action was part of his political action. His spiritual action became an integral part of the way he worked for social change. That's how I feel. And I feel that to take action is part of what right action is part of what I would feel comfortable doing. But let's remember, there were times when Gandhi drew apart. I think, I may have the dates exactly wrong, but within a framework, Gandhi withdrew, and when they wanted him to take a particular action, he said, I have to go and think about this or meditate on it. I have to go meditate. And the people came back and said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm still meditating. You know how political people are. Well, they came back and they said, well, what are you going to do, Gandhiji? And he said, I'm still meditating. And he meditated and he meditated. And then finally, he went on the Great Salt March, the Salt March to the sea. And that was his political action, and that was a strong political action that Gandhi took.
And the time alone was preparation for that.
Yes. The meditation was a preparation for social action. Now, it may have taken him, my remembrance is it was around 3 months. I may be right or wrong about that, but let's say it took him a period of weeks. It might take somebody a period of hours, weeks, months, years. But whatever it takes, that is for the individual, I think, to deal with himself or herself. And from that then can come a kind of right political action. I think many of the people who were politically involved in the 60s and early 70s did become involved after that in looking at a different kind of action, an action which focused on looking at themselves. Now it seems to me we may see those two things coming together. which I would see as a potential, I'm not sure how it'll work out, but I'm hopeful, as a potential for really right political action in the world.
The kinds of things we've been talking about all seem very practical to me, that it's very practical to speak of working on your own inner peace, your sense of peace, your centeredness perhaps, and being able to effectively work in the world, bringing about action so that it's practical both in terms of personal transformation and social transformation. I'm wondering about what seems perhaps a more mystical way of thinking about the effect of individual work on the rest of the world that comes to us through the kind of talk we've been hearing around the 100th monkey concept and the idea that that how one that when one thinks, one's thought processes also move out into the world. I'm wondering if you could say anything about how you see that.
Right. Well, we certainly
the relationship between the individual and society then.
Right. We certainly may hope that the 100th monkey phenomenon that Lyle Watson and others have talked about will work in our world. We certainly may hope that.
At least from a positive perspective.
Right, from
Since
a positive
it also could
perspective.
work in the other
That's
direction.
true,
If
that's true. From a
if
positive
it's reality, yes.
Right, from a positive perspective, we certainly may hope that. Actually, there are people who are manifesting this kind of work in the world, such as a man named A.T. Aratne in Sri Lanka. He has a movement called the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement. And it is a spiritually based movement, not just on one religion. It's strongly influenced by Buddhism, but also by Christianity and Hinduism. And that movement is a way of working in the world while still maintaining one's deep spiritual traditions. So that may be a manifestation of the way that, that some leaders may be moving. And some people may be moving. Aratne himself has said that it's not good to have an ism, that isms are not the way to approach politics, that one can go beyond these isms to something else, a kind of way of working in the world in which, from his perspective, meditation and spiritual foundations provide that foundation for kind of work. Buddhism is said by many scholars to be interested only in personal salvation. You can find this in the writings of a number of people. I think what has been missed up to this point is that a religion that's interested in personal salvation is not necessarily antithetical to political action. And I think there is much in Buddhism that could be seen as political. Some people now are even talking about engaged Buddhism. In other words, a social action coming out of Buddhism. Remember, Buddhism has an idea of non-injury, non-violence, non-harming, and that is creation-centered. In a way, it is even more inclusive than to say just "thou shalt not kill," which is really human-centered.
Right.
The Buddhists have an idea of an even larger idea of non-injury, non-killing.
Yes.
Don't forget, there have been a number of world leaders. Robert Mueller, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld. A number of our world leaders have been greatly influenced by the mystical and spiritual traditions. You know, there was a teacher in India in the, I think he died in the 70s, named Neem Karoli Baba. And he once was asked about political matters, and he said, "You know, Lincoln was a great president." And my friend who was there said to him, "Oh, really? Why is that? Why was he such a great president?" And Neem Karoli Baba said, "Because he knew Christ was really president. He was only acting president." So, you know, I think that there have been political leaders in our country and other places who are very influenced by the spiritual traditions.
Yeah, I certainly think we ought to take some heart in the the fact that there's a possibility in this world of bringing together discussion of spiritual things and discussion of politics. And I would think that your approach would perhaps bring a more powerful concept of ethics to discussion of politics, as opposed to just simply
Yes.
what is it that works in a very practical,
Definitely.
external sense. That there's much more of a what is worthwhile, what is valuable, what is important to human beings.
Yes, you're exactly right there. I am very interested in how people make decisions, and that is one of the things that we talk about in my classroom a lot. I have a sign up on my wall saying that an educator is someone who leads you partway into the woods, and education is finding your own way out. That's what I hope that my students are doing. They are looking at the range of things, the trees that I present them. Then they're finding their own way out with the kind of, with their own kind of perception of what their lives are about at their state of evolution. Still, with all of that being said, I do introduce the idea of values and ethics, and I think this is very much needed in American education. Not for me to tell them what ethics to have, not for me to tell them what values. My students are from the extreme right to the extreme left. That's not my job as an educator in a classroom. But finally, at least I want them to know that this is something about which they might think in their lives. My kind of education is for a lifetime. I tell them the semester only starts their education. The rest of it is for a lifetime.
It's simply enabling them to confront these questions, to confront the questions.
Right, to think about them, to let them reflect on this for the decades to come. Because their education only starts in a semester or two. Even students who study with me for 3 or 4 years, then they're gone. It only starts then. It's for a lifetime.